Hey everyone, welcome back to the Finding Purpose podcast. Today I have Beth Brown, a friend of mine. She is a Brooklyn-based entrepreneur whose core mission across all of her business ventures is to spread love and help others to level up their professional and personal lives. She is also a three-time author with her most recent book, Evict Fear and Getting to the Root of Your Problems in 20 Days, that just dropped 2 weeks ago. Beth, I'm so happy to see you, and I was so happy to spend the weekend with you with A to BCon. How are you doing today?
I'm great. So Adam, thank you. It was a joy to see you in person. Because a lot of times you're in a social media world. So it was so nice to see you in person on Saturday. And thank you so much for having me and inviting me onto your podcast. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. I mean, the cool thing is like when we first talked about having you on, I think we just had like such a great conversation because we connected on so many different levels when it comes to our approach, when it comes to personal development, and when it comes to forgiveness. We talked about fear, and I'm just going to jump right into it.
Yeah.
When did your journey start where you went through something that kind of planted the seeds later on in life that you need to begin that forgiveness process and facing the fear?
Yeah. I've had a couple of those moments. So yes, that's a great question. Well, I will say that what inspired the past two books, the Evict Fear, the most recent book, and the previous book, which I actually have,
Nice.
20 Days Forgiveness Journal, it was because I had gone through a very not so fun physical trauma. It was a sexual assault. And then I went through a heartbreak because I didn't want to have to deal with, I couldn't wrap my mind around what I had gone through, and I really didn't want to have to deal with it. And I think that's a lot of people's stories, to be honest. At the time, I thought it was just me. But what I have learned is a lot of people don't want to have to deal with really hurtful things. So they kind of just try to pretend them away, but they won't go away. They will come up and they will come back to bite you. And so like less than a month, less than a month, like very quickly after going through that physical trauma, I started trying to build a new relationship with someone new because I'm thinking that those things are going to make me better. They did not make me feel better. And I acted out of character with him from how I've never behaved before or since. But it was because I hadn't healed. And then I had actually gone through something. I don't know that I really want to get into it on this show because that might be a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. But in my mid-20s, I had gone through something, and I had made some choices, and I'd gone through something, and it was very, very painful. And what I have learned on my more recent journey of healing and self-discovery and getting my mind and my heart and my spirit right, is that I have this pattern of like not really dealing. And I did something very similar in my early mid-20s where I went through this trauma, and then literally, with him, it was about 2 months later, got into a relationship, and that particular relationship lasted about 4 years. But it was me trying to, again, heal myself through going through a relationship. So a lot of times when we really do have to sit down, because the last thing, right? The sexual assault and the that following heartbreak, that really sat me down on my butt. I had to take time out, and it was like a 3-year time out, and I learned a lot about myself.
I mean, I totally understand that, where like something traumatic happens to you early on and maybe you don't give it the attention that it deserved in that moment, or maybe you're just too young and too inexperienced and scared to address it. And that's very much how I was. I talk a lot about how me and my sister found out we were adopted when we were 12. I had no clue how to handle that. But it compounds over the years when you don't address it. And then, obviously life happens and other traumatic things happen to me where, I lost my best friend of cancer when we were sophomores. And having not addressed something that had happened when I was in the 8th grade, and then something stacking on top of it, it just, the snowball just gets bigger. I mean, if you don't want to share what happened on the 20th, when you were 20, that's fine. But in the moment, what was your immediate reaction?
Well, I guess I'll share. I don't know.
Okay.
So it's very, when I think about it, actually, they're very interesting traumas and that they're related, but very different. So the first situation in the 20s, I chose to have an abortion, which is very internal, and it's like part of your womb. And then the second trauma, it's like very physical. Like you go, and I remember everything about it. They give you drugs. From my experience, I am not pro-choice. And then from being a coach, and I just see that there is actually so much abuse that goes on with women, and just the way it's done, and like just the whole thing. So that really could be a whole nother podcast, But it's interesting because the trauma was really deep in my body, right? And again, with the sexual assault, that was like very, very deep in my body. I would have, if I could have, I would have just ripped my body apart. I would have ripped myself apart. I didn't really want to be connected with my body. So it was a very interesting thing. And I guess in some ways, I used a physical trauma and I tried to heal it. Now, to be very clear, the man later on in life, the second, and it didn't work out. He was like, I don't want to be with you. I was like, why doesn't this man want to be with me? Well, for a lot of reasons, of course, probably, right? You'd have to ask him. But I didn't want to be with myself. And if I don't want to be with myself, why would someone else? Like, even if they liked me, even if they were madly in love with me, why would they want to be with me? I don't want to be with me. There's like a problem. There's a mismatch. And so a lot of times in some ways I was trying to heal using sex, because I went from like the abortion to that was like 4 years, right? And then from there I went on, and I did eventually heal from it. It took me some time, but I did eventually go through a healing process, and I did face and make peace with everything within myself from the choice I made with the abortion. But what I will say is, and sometimes people aren't prepared for this, they think, oh, I've healed and I'm fine. But when you go through another hardship, that can like rip back open. Of course. Even though you've done the work and even though you have really healed. So I have never talked about this on an interview before. So
well, I think I just want to just like tell you, I really like the vulnerability is beautiful, because I think that is half of the journey of healing, when you become vulnerable and you share things that you've held inside that to a certain extent trap you. from, blooming to your full potential. That's very much how I felt about a lot of the things that happened to me where, there's a difference between guilt and shame, and some of them made me feel guilty. And I define guilt as being ashamed of something you did. But some of them made me feel shameful, where I define that as not being happy with who you are, so it's like this, and like that's a very, very thin line. When that guilt graduates to shame, it's something that, like becoming vulnerable is a necessity in order for you to be like, hey, it's out there. It's no longer has that same power over me because I'm not scared to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
And for me, that was very liberating. And I think, I think that's how it works when it comes. And I talk to a lot of personal growth coaches, and I've been in the sobriety space and the mental health space where that's the whole point of it, to not be afraid of yourself and what you're bottling up.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to like you think that people are going to, like, I know for me, I thought people were going to judge me. I thought people were going to look at me differently. And what had actually happened was when I started to tell more of my story, people would come up to me and be like, that was really brave. Mm-hmm. I went through something similar. Yeah. And it's almost selfish of me to hold on to that story because it can help a lot of people, Yeah. And so what you just did right now was brave, but just, I hope you're feeling empowered by that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. In the immediate aftermath of, because, obviously abortion is something that people,
it's a hot topic.
It's a hot topic, and it's a very polarizing topic. But at the end of the day, people forget that it's a personal choice. And, and even if you feel like it's going to damage the way people view you, I really think whenever I've been in that moment, I was really just more afraid of how I felt about myself. So the forgiveness component, where I think that's a beautiful journey, which we spoke about in our previous conversation. Mm-hmm. Was a lot of it really just forgiving yourself?
Yes. Yes. So you had actually said something earlier when you talked about compound or the compounding effect. So, and there's like a really great business book, one of my favorite business books I've ever read, also called The Compound Effect. And so whichever direction we are going in, either like choosing to like not heal or ignore, and it's going to compound and compound and compound and come out in a form of like what you were talking about, shame, which is like the guilt and the fear and the anger and the frustration, and it all compounds and it becomes like this big mountain, and you may not even realize it, but now you have a whole lot of things that you need to forgive yourself for and other people for as well. Or the opposite is true, right? You can forgive, right? And that does open up space for you to heal. I always say it's like the best self-care gift you can ever give yourself. It's the best self-love gift you can ever give yourself. It is, in general, it's the best gift you can give yourself. And short of choosing God, in my opinion, but, even he commands like forgiveness. It's like all intertwined for our freedom, our physical freedom. There's been research done on like unforgiveness and like that building cortisol and different and leading to diseases, heart diseases. The depression rate is very high because of unforgiveness, and people may or may not realize it. And my mom was telling me she was listening to someone. I haven't researched it a lot, but it makes sense. She was like, I was just listening to someone and they were saying, she didn't say who it was, so I can't tell you who it was she was listening to. They were saying how that when you actually choose to not forgive someone, you are still connected to them.
I love that.
And when you are choosing not to forgive yourself, in actuality, what you are still doing is you're still connected to your past. You're still connected to your shame. You're still connected to your guilt. You're still connected to your anger. You're still connected to your grief. And sometimes grief does last a lifetime. I mean, we may grieve the loss of something forever, right? While we're on this planet, but it doesn't mean that we stay in that, like, once, people take grief and like build like amazing foundations and do amazing philanthropic work, and just all sorts of start businesses, for-profit businesses around grief. It's like, there's all sorts of like amazing things that can come out of it. But when we don't forgive ourselves, we stay stuck and then it compounds. And then we're at the end of our life going, well, okay, like nothing worked out. Well, if you think about it, did you go back when like you stayed chained, you kept yourself anchored in that back place where you got hurt originally?
Well, you said something really powerful, that when you don't forgive someone, you continue to stay connected with them, and not in a good way, where, forgiveness requires just kind of like overcoming a resentment, and resentment is baggage. And it's crazy because one of the key components for me on my recovery journey is offloading resentments, and resentments can be super petty, or they can be really deep and going to need, a substantial conversation to be resolved. But the one thing that all resentments have in common is that they're with me only. A lot of the times, the people who I have resentments for aren't even aware of it. And we think it's taking so much space up in their head too. And that's how oftentimes my resentments grow, because I'm like, they have to know I'm upset with them. There's no way. And they're just going about, and it just grows and it just grows and it just grows. Meanwhile, they have no clue that they offended you. Nope. And they're sitting about there. And when I approach them and I'm like, hey, listen, when you did this, it made me feel this way. They're like, oftentimes they're like, I had no idea it made you feel that way.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that like we could be in this space, like kind of like, just clenching our fists, both figuratively and emotionally. And half the time other people have moved on from it and we're holding on to it. And letting those go are really, 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 really essential for me, because what I do with my resentments is I make poor choices. Like I hurt myself because of them. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people do that in different ways.
Yeah. Self-sabotage. It's important too to communicate with a person. I thought a lot of times there's fear, right? I feel like even the root of, that's why I wrote the Evict Fear journal, getting to the root of your problems in 20 days, because fear is, I'm not a neuroscientist or a psychologist or anything. I'm a coach. I'm a breakthrough coach. I was also a teacher for 20 years. So I know how to teach techniques and different tools. And I'm a professional photographer. So, I have a lot of people skills. But I always want to make it clear whenever I speak that I'm not a neuroscientist or a social worker or anything like that. But we have to let it go, and we have to let people know who offended us that they offended us. Because a lot of times we're afraid to speak up, because then we're pissed off and we're as mad as hell at someone. But then we don't want them to know that we're mad at them, because then we're afraid we're going to lose the relationship. Like, what kind of weirdness is that? And it doesn't serve the relationship, but also it doesn't give the other person a chance to apologize. They may not ever apologize, and they may never see the same point of view, and you may never get an apology, right? And they may like blow it off, right? So like when bringing up an offense, I think it's important to not have expectations about how the person is. It may cause the relationship to be lost. The person may react like absolutely inappropriately. They also may act appropriately. They may take steps, right? I had someone last month, she was like, hey, I need to talk to you. And I was like, okay. And she told me something that I did. I had literally no idea. Like I didn't know. I had no clue. I didn't realize I hadn't made a comment to her. Like I didn't, I did not know. It was not intentional. And so of course, because now I realize I can, like, this is, someone I love, it's a friend. I love my friends. And, and so I can now like apologize, and I can now like go back and that was like something that like, it was like a oops kind of like oversight. And I could actually go back and correct it. And sometimes we can't correct our mistakes. It was like really minor. And she wasn't like major of it. It was just like, it was just like irking her a little bit. And I think it's really important because you were saying it's petty, but so what if it's petty? Because those little petty things can compound. And if you have like 30 different petty things on your mind, now all of a sudden you have a problem. And I think, it's good to get it out. Don't be afraid.
It's just what might be petty to us might not be petty to other people.
And that's true.
And that's the craziest thing. It's like, I'll be like, oh, that's not a big deal. And they'll be like, no, like that really, really, really hurt me. And, I've had trouble in relationships when I would kind of be a little brazen and just sometimes neglectful when it comes to just understanding that this is important to them. And I would justify it as like, well, not everything that's important to you needs to be important to me, which is true. But
right.
In the moment when they're telling me something that's important to them, I should treat it with the level of care that they would want me to, if I care to nurture that relationship. Yeah. And, and sometimes, people have done that to me where something was very important to me and they didn't address it the way I would have liked them, or you could tell that they're brushing you off, or they're nonchalant, or, and it's hurtful when people do that.
Yeah.
But I think, as I grow in like my personal development journey and build my relationship that I have with myself, I'm very aware, or I try to be as aware as possible of how other people feel. But it's definitely a hard, easier said than done. When you were talking about fear, though, fear is something that I think is rooted in. I think every negative emotion is attached to fear.
Yep.
Because like even if I'm angry, usually like I'm afraid of like an outcome. I'm afraid of how someone will react. I'm afraid I won't get what I want. And that has helped me with that strategy, understanding that when I don't feel how I want to feel, that fear has to have some sort of role, has helped me when it comes to just like, all right, pause. Yeah. And let me uncover what the real root of this feeling is. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree, but I would actually say, that's where I got off track a little bit with I'm not a neuroscientist. I would say, or a psychiatrist or anything, I would say it's attached to every emotion, the good and the bad. So, for example, you're married to your husband or your wife, your partner, right? There should be a little bit of fear where you respect that person enough to not intentionally hurt you or hurt them. Of course, things are going to happen, but you want to be afraid enough to lose them that it checks you from like, being for the streets, while you're married, or whatever it is. Roller coasters, that's fear. But people love them. Skydiving, some of these things I'm like, yeah, I think I'm not going to do. Fear keeps us alive, right? And it goes back to like when we were, hunters and gatherers, and it's like, well, don't stand in front of the charging rhino. Now it's just like, don't stand in front of the MTA bus as it's like barreling down the avenue, it's good too. So there are good things about it, but then there's the other part, and it can, when we become all consumed with something, it can grow bigger than we think it needs to be. Similar to you, right? Very similar. And I think maybe almost anyone who's ever shared a part of their story has always felt like, I'm ashamed. And if people know, then they'll think weird things about me. And maybe they will, but you know what? I've learned it's not my business what you think about me anyway. It's really not my business what goes on in your brain. I have a whole full-time job paying attention to what's going on in my brain. But we get afraid, and we can like meditate it so it becomes bigger. When I first was like honest to myself, because the thing that made me so ashamed with the person that I tried building a relationship with after the sexual assault trauma, I wasn't talking to myself. I wasn't talking to God. I wasn't talking to anyone. And I couldn't really admit it. And at one point I did have a conversation with him, and I was like, well, I just had this, really bad experience. It wasn't good. And I said that he had tried to sexually assault me. Trying is not the same thing as doing. And so I lied to him. And that made me also a liar. And it was something that I'd never been. I was just telling someone else in another, in a conversation I was having with them, I would cheat on someone and be like, by the way, I cheated on you. Like, I've never been a liar. And so,
Why do you think you did that?
Because
why do you think, were you protecting yourself or were you protecting him?
No, I was trying to protect myself because I felt like there were certain things. And when I say that the traumas come back and like the old things can get ripped back open and be almost as painful or more painful, I was like, look at my life choices. I know what the Bible says. I know it says a man who finds a wife finds a good thing. Look at my choices. How could I be, like there was a lot of, it's the thoughts and they were compounding. So I was like, so I made a bad choice with someone pregnant. Made another bad choice with how I took care of that. Then made a bad choice with who I decided to get involved with this time. I had friends who warned me. I had a dream that warned me. It wasn't like it was a surprise that this guy was a total jerk. I had warnings. Like, I knew better.
Why do you think you ignored it?
In that situation? So, good question. I wasn't resting. So I was very busy and it was entertainment for me. I had other friends, but I was like, this could be an entertainment. This could be an adventure. I've always loved adventure. Adventure has been my biggest downfall, but also my biggest catalyst for success. And so I was some weeks, one week, I don't even know if it's physically possible, but I think I did the math right. And it was 80 hours. I was teaching full time. I had my photography business. I still have my photography business. I'm a professional photographer, but it was like a side hustle back then. So I was doing shoots and then editing. Teaching requires also grading, also requires lesson planning. And then I was going to school because I thought I wanted to do massage therapy, and it was an anatomy class, and that requires a lot of studying. And so I would get up, I would go to work. On my break, I would edit photos or study. Then that was my lunch break. Then I'd get out of work. I would go to class or go to someplace else, but it was like work. And then even when I was at class, on my dinner breaks at class, I'd be editing photos or grading people. Like I was nonstop. Only my friends who insisted, they would not let me get out of seeing them. They were the only ones that I was seeing. And this guy. Because he popped up. I went to an event and I was like, oh, okay, that's how I met him. And then it just, yeah. But he got me. He got me because he invited me out to talk business. That's how he initially got me. Because I was not trying, and I was like, oh, this could be a fun little side, amusement.
Yeah. So it's funny because one of the biggest things for me is, and as I've grown, is looking back and finally acknowledging that there were so many red flags that I ignored. And, it's funny when you can actually look and be like, all right, red flag, red flag, red flag, green flag, green flag, green flag. And they're there too, and more often than not, we're like, all right, that's a red flag, but I'll do it anyway, rather than, someone who does have the energy that we want, or a situation that really does make us happy presents itself. And it's a complete green flag. It's exactly where you'll feel comfortable, but, we're like, eh. And it's so funny because I've ignored so many red flags in my life. And someone was telling me the other day, sometimes if you make a decision with your head or your heart, your head or your heart, sorry. But what you really should be doing is trust your gut. Your gut is such a good compass when it comes, because that feeling when you're like, I'm making a poor choice, and your stomach kind of turns.
It does.
And
yeah,
it's that it's going to be fun in this moment, but I know how this is going to play out, and you do it anyway. And there's been so many times that I've been in that situation where I was just like, I know how this is going to play out, but in the moment, I'm going to do it because it's the easy decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there is, that gut instinct, intuition. There's something that warns us. And I had someone say to me, well, she was doing, she had a question. She was doing a youth group, through her church. And she was like, they're asking me questions like, why? And this is not a one size fits all, because different situations, right? But sometimes she was like, why does God let bad things happen? If God really is love and he's this and he's all powerful, why would he let? Well, because we have one, free choice. He's not a dictator. We all get free choice, so we get to choose. But I told her, I was like, very similar to you. There's those red flags. And for me, coming from a place of faith from the Bible, I believe that those red flags are often God saying, hey, lady, hey, sir, that's not the way to go. Because in my situation, I had a dream. Not specifically about him, but the way the dream was, it indicated that there was someone who was no good that was in my life that should not be. And he really was the only person it could have been. I had another friend who was like, Beth, this is just a bad idea. And then I had another friend who was like, I had a dream about you and you were in muddy water. And she was like, and if you don't get out, you're going to have a hard time getting out. And it was a hard time getting out because was it this year or the end of last year? I had noticed every once in a while, there was a Facebook notification that popped up that this guy had created a new account. I have tried to block him on all levels, but up until maybe this happened in 2016, up until maybe 2021, every once in a while I'd get an email from him. Still, it was I was like, how do I block you? But you still. So she had, I had warnings. I had warnings. His ex-wife, right? He had an ex-wife. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why a marriage ends. It doesn't always mean that the guy is a jerk or the lady's a jerk, right? It doesn't always mean a red flag, just to be clear. But yeah, like you're divorced and yet all of your ex-wife's clothes are in the closet. I like my clothes. Maybe she wanted nothing to. There's like maybe all sorts of reasons why the clothes were still there. But yeah, to me, it's like in hindsight, like she probably couldn't get away as fast. She probably was like trying to get away as fast as she could. Because after I finished with him, I wanted to be zoop.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny that you mentioned like how you turn to God and like you get these signs from God. And then when it gets really dark, you say those foxhole prayers where you're like, God, please get me out of this. Give me a sign. Give me an indicator. And, you know, God must be sitting up there being like, hey, I gave you like 6 signs, you know, and you chose to ignore them all. And now you're praying and you're asking me to get you out of this when you know exactly what you need to do.
You're mad at me. You're mad at me because I didn't stop you. Well, why would you stop me? You gave me free choice. Like, I don't want a dictator. So yeah, yeah. Yeah.
It's funny though, because, you know, how I know you now, you know, obviously these stories that you're telling me have shaped the way your approach to life now. What do you think was the biggest, what do you think was the most significant change that you made in the way that you think that sparked your path to personal development?
Oh gosh. Wow. The very first thing, and nothing can come after that. I do have a few keys that I feel are like very foundational, right? But the very, very, very first thing, and nothing else can happen without it, I believe personally from my experience and what I've seen with other people, is honesty. If you're not going to be honest, if you're not going to start with a place of truth, everything is going to be built on a lie or is going to be built on avoidance. So my very first moment was when I said out loud, and I wasn't even talking to anyone, but I just said it out loud. I lied to the man who I love that I was raped. And it was like something broke. Like I just felt like something broke. It just felt like this major release. And it's still, you know, it was like a 3-year journey for me because I was, you know, a little stubborn in some of my ways. And I really didn't want to forgive. I didn't want to forgive him because I really did love him. And I was, you know, whatever. Anyway, it is what it is. I had to forgive myself first. And I had to get the second thing that I feel is very foundational to healing is curious. Because you had said something about earlier getting what you want. And we think that if we don't forgive, we will get what we want. We will eventually get the apology. We will eventually get the relationship back, whatever. Not in the right way. Even if we get the apology, it's like, no, forgiveness is, people have, I teach a whole workshop on what forgiveness is and is not, and people have a lot of different misconceptions about it. But it's, you know, not always what you want. We don't always get what we want. And we think in order to forgive, I have to get what I want. But what you really want, how do you get even a chance at what you want when you're not even open to whatever it could look like?
Yeah, open-mindedness and honesty, I think if you're honest and open-minded, I think a lot of doors open. What I had previously said that, you know, I would trace negative emotions to fear. And a lot of it was the fear of not getting what you want. And sometimes that fear can become all encompassing that we neglect actually taking the necessary steps to getting what we want. So when remember Jen Gottlieb this weekend. She said she asked very successful people, does fear ever go away? And she said every single one of them would tell her no. Jen, you just become more skilled at navigating life with the fear. And eventually the fear doesn't have the same power that it used to once you continue to do it over and over and over again. And she referred to the ice bath as an example for her. And I think that runs in line exactly with what we're talking about, where forgiveness is the fear attached to forgiveness is being like you said, the necessary tools for both of those journeys to start is being completely honest with yourself.
Yeah. Being
curious about different options that can liberate you from those handcuffs. Mm-hmm. And so you start this journey, and incorporating just. I'm assuming you kind of just made a pledge to yourself that like this journey from here on is going to be an honest journey. And
I guess I probably did subconsciously. I don't think I actually made a pledge to myself. I was trying to dig myself out of a dark place, and I just didn't know how to do it. And I did kind of stumble upon the fact that it helped to be honest. Yeah.
When you were just emerging from that dark place, who was your support system?
So I did not really have a support system. So I didn't really tell anyone what was going on with me because I was ashamed, very ashamed. My support system literally was God. I did a lot of reading. I read some different books. There's a book by Joyce Meyer, which is really good, called Battlefield of the Mind. And she went through some like really horrific childhood, traumas, where she was molested and everything by her father, different, it's like really intense. So I think I identified a little bit with her story, and, the way she tells her story, I don't know her personally, but it seems like she was a little bit stubborn sometimes in like coming around. And I can be a little stubborn. So I kind of identified with her. But it was a good book because I learned really that, I learned a lot about our thoughts and having to like really shift mindset. But we are, as humans, we are body, mind, and spirit. We're three parts. And so we have to, in order, like we're complex. So healing is not just about like a mindset shift. It's about a spirit. There has to be a spiritual deliverance or a spiritual change that also goes with that mindset shift, right? I think also Alex this weekend at the conference, people who are watching this are gonna be like, what are they talking about? From A to B Con. But
Alex Morton, yeah.
Yeah, but he talked about focus. And, we are told in the Bible to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And so we are supposed to renew our minds. And what are we supposed to think about? It talks about, think about whatever is pure, is true, is of good report. Think about the times like you've been helped, the time, like the good times. It doesn't mean like stuff and shove and forget anything like bad ever happened and pretend, and then there's that toxic church culture where you just pretend you're always blessed and highly favored. It's not really about like pretending something and ignoring like the hard part, but we do have to like literally, our minds are programmable. Okay. We can program our minds by whatever we read, by whatever we watch. And my support system was really God. I chose not to do therapy because I'm a recovering perfectionist and I knew what I would do. I would show up and it'd be like, hi, I'm Beth, and I have this issue and let's get to it. And I would have like performed and done my best to like be a star therapy student or whatever that's called. And I'm not anti-therapy. I think therapy is good. I would encourage people, you know, like when I coach people, I give them resources from like the suicide hotline to like resources for therapists. So it's, you know, and I work with people, and sometimes those people work with me and they have a therapist. So it's not that I'm anti-therapy. I just knew myself and how
I get that.
behave.
I totally get that. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I remember like when the first time I ever went to see a therapist, I like, it's like I cared what they thought about me too much. And I would like downplay things that I did. It would be like, all right, yeah, I'll do that. And yeah, I would try to look good for them, you know? And, you know, in hindsight, they had to have known I was full of shit. There's no way they didn't know. But one thing that you just said, and I think is so important, is addressing the spiritual malady. Because you're right, your mind you could program, and obviously with your body you can work out and you can eat healthy, and it's very, you know, those are the things that you do to build that up. But you need to feed your spirit as well, and building up your spiritual connection with, whether it's your faith, whether it's a God of your choosing, whatever it is, you know. For me, it's God. You know, I was raised Jewish, and then dated a Catholic, and it's like, so like and my dad's Hindu, you know, so it's like I've been like around like so many different religions where it's like it's just God. It's everyone's God, you know. Like I'll share him with every faith. It doesn't matter, and you know, God has played like such a huge role in my spiritual journey because I have someone to talk to when I feel alone. And, you know, whether it's driving in my car and my mind is racing with, you know, sometimes negative thoughts, turn off the radio and I just talk to God. And sometimes I talk to my mom, and sometimes I talk to my best friend who passed. And, you know, like it's having those connections are really, really important because then I'm never alone, you know? And I'm like you in that point in the space when I get into a real dark place, I isolate. And, you know, and I needed that. Just like you turned to your faith. That was really huge for me to even begin this relationship with myself.
Yeah. I feel like I can't speak to other traumas because, again, I'm not a psychiatrist. So I have really the research and every digging has gone with like my healing. But, you know, reconnect. But I feel like probably it would maybe apply to any type of trauma is because, and the only reason I say that is because trauma is recorded in our body.
I love that.
I learned that the first time when I was taking the massage therapy classes, and my professor talked about how, like, when you touch someone's body to do the massage, they may have a reaction, like they may just start crying or whatever. Like she talked about a client she'd had one time who, when she touched her, the client just started crying and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and like cried for the whole session. Like they didn't really do any massage therapy. The woman was just in tears. So it's stored in the muscles. It is stored in our guts as well, you know, and you will see that a lot or feel that a lot when, you know, you're like, oh, something doesn't feel right. Well, that something actually might be right. And it might be it's that it's so opposite to what you're doing. So for example, like if you've always dated like an abusive partner, and now all of a sudden, and you're kind of used to that, and that's like normal to you. Now all of a sudden you're dating this man or this woman, and they're treating you like a queen or a king. And they're not doing it to be manipulative or because they're narcissists. They're like, literally, they love you. They really care for you. And you're like, something's wrong. and like you've got like all these knots now in your stomach or whatever, and you've got these memories, right? So the trauma does get stored in the memory. So for me, I had to reconnect to my body. I had to figure that out, and I didn't know how to do it. So this was like my healing journey, was like, okay, God, what do I do next? And I felt like he was leading me through it. And so one of the things I used was dancing. Because remember, it was like a very deep trauma that happens in my body. And so I have to like reconnect and like movement. But sometimes people, like, it can be walking, it could be running. You know, a lot of people do weightlifting in the gym. But what you're doing is you're creating a new experience, you're creating new memories, and you're having to, whether you realize it or not, reconnect with your body. And especially with dance, well, it depends on the type of dance. But, you know, like you're using your hips, or you're using, you know, like it's just like parts of your body. For me, it was very healing. And the other thing,
it's like move a muscle, change a thought, you know, and
yeah.
and you associate those movements with positive feelings. And when you have those relationships, it's just like, hey, like just associating the movements with the positive feelings is just like rebranding almost that feeling, right? It's an escape.
It is.
It's an outlet.
It's a new experience. You know, like I was literally learning to love my body again and love being with my body. And the other thing I felt like God was showing me to do was to begin photographing myself, which is also kind of very intimate. So I did. And some of those photos you could find, like if you went way back on my Instagram page, and some of them I haven't ever put out. And
well, that's awesome.
Yeah. And I called this series Seeing Myself in a New Light, because photography, if you don't know, it means drawing with light in Greek. And a lot of times, the trauma that we go through, it causes us to have certain ideas about ourselves, certain thoughts about ourselves, certain thoughts about other people, ideas about other people. Oh, like all men are going to cheat. All women are just using me for my money, whatever it is, you know. I go back to the relationships a lot because that's where a lot of times drama happens. Like, at one point I was like, I hope my future husband's mother is dead, because I saw how my dad's mother treated my mother. I was like, I hope I don't have a mother-in-law. God has healed me. And I realized on my forgiveness journey that I had a lot of forgiving to do. Like I actually really had a forgiveness problem. Now I'm like, Jesus, I want mother-in-law.
Right.
But I mean, you know, like these were like real things. And, you know, I had my own ideas or my own thought patterns based on things I'd seen growing up. And you really have to, forgiveness is so key. And it was rooted in fear, like the fear that I would have to and I am not passive, that I would you know, curse my future mother-in-law out. And then there'd be like disharmony in the home. Yeah. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think the opposite is going to be wonderful. But you know, like I had all these dark ideas, these dark things in my mind, these dark thoughts. That's really dark if you think about it.
It's pretty dark.
Way. Yeah.
But
so
it's funny because it's like, you're probably not the first person to ever have that thought. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and it's funny how like you say them now, and when you have a different perspective, you laugh at it, you know, and you're like, damn, I can't believe I seriously thought that way, you know?
Yeah.
So like, what do you do day to day to continue your journey, your healing journey, and your underlying purpose of helping others on their path?
Yeah. So it is about, I do have to pay attention to my thoughts. I would advise us all to do that. It's all a good idea. because our thoughts come from different places, and things do try to creep back. And so, like, where did that thought come from? It says, it's, in the Bible, it says, take every thought captive. Well, why did I think that? Who told me that? So, paying attention literally to what we're thinking. And then, why did I think that? I'm not talking about sitting around and overanalyzing and like going down a rabbit hole of overthinking, which I can also do. But, just paying attention to what I'm thinking. Is it, fear is, I think, as the Stoics say, it's like you're thinking about something that hasn't even happened yet. Like, you're imagining a whole future for what? Like, that's not even in your control. You're not even 5 minutes out. You're not 5 days out. You're not 5 years. You're like here. Why are you creating a whole story? Like,
The overthinking is just,
yeah. So
your mind can take you to crazy places. And I totally get that. Like, one thought just grows, and then you're thinking 10 years from now, and you're like, wait a second, how did I lose this moment?
yeah. What happened?
Like I'm sitting here in a coffee shop, and I started thinking about like Whole Foods, and then someone pops in your mind, and the next thing you know, like, something terrible is going to happen 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And you're like, and you're just like, how did I just embark on that thought process? So yeah, I like how you said the Bible says, take your thoughts captive rather than letting your thoughts take you captive.
Yeah. No, we can't do that.
That's just so powerful. And I also like how you shared about the photography and how that was just like freeing when you use it as a way to just re-image yourself in your own conscience. And I've always appreciated photography, and I never looked at it from that angle before, where when I take pictures of myself, or having it kind of be like a perspective that I can go back to. So that's so cool. Go ahead.
No, you said perspective. And that's really the key for fear, for forgiveness, for love, for grief, for whatever it is. It requires a perspective shift. So I titled that the self-portrait series, and every once in a while I still do it, just for fun. I still photograph myself sometimes, seeing myself in a new light, because it's like a shift in perspective. And my coaching program, my signature coaching program, is literally titled "Seeing Myself in a New Light," and like a hashtag I use a lot of times on social media is "Seeing Myself in a New Light." And I think people don't like get it, and I don't always talk about it as consistently as maybe I should for branding and marketing purposes, but whatever. So yeah, it's really like we have to see ourselves from a different perspective. And the reason why I root everything from a biblical perspective as a foundation for what I teach from my journals to like my one-to-one private coaching clients is because that is the same. It doesn't change. Culture, obviously, in America has changed from like 1800 to 2024. I'm not saying we've gotten any better, but things have changed. Like culture to culture, I can live here and things are one perspective. I can go to Argentina, things are going to be a different perspective. Like, it's not like, where is my data? Like, I have to somehow, I'm not really into math, but math is very like data. Like, there has to be something that kind of standardizes it and keeps things like centered and from like shaky. The media is going to say its own thing. And I do not even own a TV, because that TV, the news, is going to program you to think that, well, let's just not go there.
Yeah.
So it's going to program a lot of fear in you. Really.
Of course. And, I think that's why a lot of news is negative. Fear, this conversation at the end of the day has kept going back to fear. And I love that, because talking about fear is just like what you just said about the news is so accurate. And a lot of what we consume is meant to trigger our darkest impulses and not our brightest impulses. And it's super dangerous. So I love that you don't have a TV. I have a TV, but the amount of TV that I watch has diminished tremendously as I began to focus more on myself. It's just that I can't have other factors really influence it. It needs to come from in here. And if I'm like, oh, well, this is what they're doing, I think a huge part is the comparison game, that consumption of media allows you to do. And it's dangerous, it really is. And I feel bad when I see people often refer to what they've seen on social media as a standard, when, you don't really never know what anyone's going through, and, but yeah, I should probably get rid of now I feel like I should get rid of my TV.
Well, I originally got rid of my TV because I was like, if I'm going to live an entrepreneurial lifestyle, I need to work. And that was back when I still had my full-time job. So I was like, if I'm going to do at least one thing to better myself every day and grow my business, which was I don't know, I got rid of it. It was years. It's been a decade. But but we have to have something to anchor, because social media is in itself, and the comparison game, and this, and then our family culture that we grew up in, and then our friends and the schools, and everyone's teaching something a little bit different. And so how the heck, what am I supposed to do? I have to have something to base it on that's not going to change, but that gives me at the same time a higher perspective. I can't, if I want to elevate my life and I want to have a prosperous life of, love and good health, and I'm not even talking about money. The money is the bonus, right? How am I going to do that without driving myself crazy? I have to have something to base it on. So that's why I teach everything from a biblical perspective. It just doesn't change. Whether you agree or not, it's standard. It's not, Yeah,
no, absolutely. One of the things that I love that you did is write a book, and this is something that I want to eventually do. And what was your journey when you through the whole book process? How did that?
Yeah.
I mean, because one of the reasons why I want to do it is because I feel like I will grow a lot. Once I start the project from start to finish, the end result will also be a shift in just my growth journey as well. Yeah. So how did that process play out for you?
It will be a growth journey. It's rewarding. Yeah, because you're going to help so many people when you write that book. It's going to really support people. The forgiveness journal, I was more excited about. So I kind of did, so, kind of what we were talking about earlier, it's really a lifestyle. And I feel like what I was living prior to that was not so much of a healthy, emotionally, spiritually, and physically healthy lifestyle. Cause clearly I'm getting out of trauma and just trying to use a new relationship to comfort me instead of healing. So I made the journal lifestyle-like. So it looks, and the Vict Fear is very similar too, in that it has lifestyle. I was trying to evoke lifestyle images. So I was like, what are the tools? What are the things that I used that helped me forgive myself and forgive other people? And I tried to keep it general. Most people say that the forgiveness journal has helped them with self-forgiveness, but I did try to write it in such a way and put it together where it could help you also if you needed to forgive someone else too. But I just kind of outlined it in a Google Doc, and then I went into Canva and tried to make it lifestyle pretty. But it was a lot of work. And then I tested it out. So I got a little group who did a challenge with me. I still teach that challenge, but it's now a little bit more in depth, and I teach that workshop still. Every once in a while, like every couple months. But like I had some people, and so I kind of worked out the kinks in that way. And then because it was so much work, I was like, I don't want to do fear. In fact, I didn't even think about doing fear until I took my forgiveness journal and was trying to get it into bookstores. And the bookstore people were like, well, what do you have on anxiety? People are coming in about anxiety. I was like, I don't have anything, but I had felt leading up, like I felt like I was starting to get poked a little bit in my spirit to do a one on fear. And I was like, oh no. And so then I dragged my feet for a couple more months. I was like, I don't have to do this. Yeah. But I finally did, and I outlined it, put it all together, and then I put it up on Teachable. And I was like, it's just going to be digital, and I'll do some workshops, which I still have the free workshops I teach as well every once in a while. I was like, but I'm not going to publish it. It's just like, it's too much work. I was being lazy. I told you, sometimes I'm stubborn. But then I was like, you know what? People aren't really going and getting digital copies. And the people who have purchased the digital copies, I piloted it. So, I have testimonials, and, I know it works. It's powerful. They're both really powerful. This, I was told by someone, is better than 5 years of therapy. I haven't gotten that compliment yet on Evict Fear, but people have loved it. And they wanted a physical copy. They were like, I don't really like this digital thing. So it's now no longer available digitally. And you can get it on Amazon. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm probably going to reach out to you when I begin mine and take some pointers from you. Cool. I know your time's valuable, and I do want to ask you 3 kind of rapid fire. I've said rapid fire in previous podcasts, and it's never rapid fire. So
okay. I was like, whoa.
The first question is, what are 3 things that you do daily to feed your purpose?
Yes. So 3 things I do daily is I track, and I make sure that I know I have a 1% goal. I learned this last year at A2B conference talking to Ken, and I'm blinking on his last name. But anyway.
Ken Jocelyn.
Thank you. Yes. And since then, I was like, this is really good. So I have a 1% growth goal. That's actually in my business. But my business and my purpose are, as long as I'm helping people, right? So I have a 1% growth goal for each day. I listen to either a podcast or a book when I'm getting ready in the morning. So it is about what we're programming our minds in to. So some sort of like intellectual nourishment. And also prayer is very important as well.
Love that.
But then I still like use some of those other tools like movement, walking, dancing. Like I still, and I put things, but those are like 3 consistent things.
Okay. The prayers is all 3 of those are things that I incorporate. The 1% rule, I gotta research a little more. I remember Ken talking about it last year as well. My second question is, who is your biggest role model?
So I think it's always a hard question because I don't really feel that way about most people. But I would say my mom's mom's late mother, my grandmother. She had a lot of what?
I'm just gonna start ask the question again. Yeah. And I'm gonna edit this part. Who is your biggest role model or mentor?
Yeah, I would say, I'll still say my grandmother because she had all these sayings like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. There were different like pieces of advice that if you think about it, she was really talking about self-advocacy, advocating for yourself, standing up for yourself, speak up. And yeah, and she was just also kind of feisty, sometimes to her
That's where you get it
detriment.
from?
But when she was 90, she was shoveling snow off the roof of her house. So, that kind of grit, I really admire. Like you do what you have to do and you keep going. Yeah.
Love that. And then the last rapid fire question. What 3 pieces of advice would you give to someone just starting on their journey to finding purpose?
So for purpose, yes, I would say people think sometimes that purpose means what you do for work. And they're, in my opinion, 2 separate things. Your purpose is like why you're here. Your work is like a tool. So sometimes people are like, oh, I'm not living my purpose because I'm working this job. I know I've felt that way. That's not it. The purpose is why you're here, and your work is the tool. So how to figure out like a purpose if you're stuck. What are people telling you a lot about yourself? Like when you think back over your life, what are some compliments? Like, so for example, for me, a lot of 95 or more % of the time, people are like, oh, I love how you make me feel. I feel so inspired or encouraged. So it's a clue that I'm probably here to encourage people. If this is like across the board from all different areas of life, feedback I'm getting. Thinking about like things that you're drawn to. Like you might be drawn to like social injustice, or you might be drawn to like helping like to like homeless people, or you might be, there's like what kind, and it's not specifically the work, but like what is speaking to you? What do you keep coming back to? That's a clue. Prayer, ask God, never hurts to ask, because you'll get an answer. And maybe not immediately, but you might get an answer because someone comes up to you and says, oh, when I'm around you, you inspire me. And that would be a clue, right? It's not always like a booming voice. It could be through the person, right? That we meet. But yeah, you like seeing what people say about you. What are you consistently drawn to, like in that area? And how else would you figure out your purpose? A third thing. Gosh. I feel a little stuck.
It's okay.
I guess it still comes back to like kind of like what comes naturally to you. Like people think they have to be extroverted. If they're introverted, they're like, oh, this or something, like I can't. But it's like whatever comes natural to you. You can be quiet too and make an impact, a huge major impact. In fact, there's a book called Quiet that talks about how introverts really actually run the world. But sure. Think about like what comes natural to you. Like maybe,
I love that.
Maybe, I don't know. Like a quiet person might be someone who I don't want to put someone's purpose out there. So I don't want to give an example. No. I want to leave it open.
I love that. No, I love that. And sometimes being still and is what's going to lead you to purpose. Just being in your own thoughts and being like, this is what really makes me happy. Beth Brown, please tell everyone how they can reach you, how they can get you to photograph their next event, and and how they can access your books.
Yes. So
actually, let me redo that again. I'm going to cut that.
Okay.
Beth Brown, thank you so much for being here on the Finding Purpose podcast. Could you please tell our guests how they can reach you for either your photography or access to your programs and your books?
Yes. Thank you. This has been fun. I'm so happy to have chatted with you. Thank you. Thank you. And so for either my photography or coaching, you can go to my website, which is levelupwithbeth.com. And that has photography, that has coaching, that has my books. It even has some merch, some t-shirts and stuff on it. So my website is kind of like one stop, and it even has like the connections to like my Instagram and everything. But you can also find me on Instagram at Babs, BABS, Photography LLC. And you can email me at light@levelupwithbeth.com. And my books are on Amazon. So I don't know that I don't know so much about the Evict Fear yet because it's newer, but if someone typed in like 20-day forgiveness journal, it will like pop right up on Amazon.
Lovely. Beth, thank you so much for having you. Or you can reach out to me and I will happily connect you with Beth as well.
Thank you.
But listen, it was great seeing you this weekend. I'm so grateful that you agreed to be here. I think you just provided so much value to my viewers, and the message that you carry and continue to share is just so inspirational. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll talk very soon.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.